details in the digital.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're tackling something pretty fundamental to qualitative analysis today, coding.
Yeah, coding. It's for researchers dealing with just mountains of text, interviews, notes. It's been the go-to method.
Right, the essential process for making sense of it all, pulling out themes, understanding what's really there.
But, things change, research evolves, and now we have generative AI stepping onto the scene.
Exactly. So the big question, especially for anyone wanting insights without getting lost in the weeds, is, do we still need traditional coding?
With these powerful AI tools emerging, can we get to those aha moments, that deep understanding, maybe more efficiently, without spending, endless hours manually tagging everything?
That's the core question we're digging into. And our guide for this is an article by Dr. Susanne Friese. It's called Life Without Coding in Qualitative Analysis. Does generative AI fulfill this dream?
And it's great because it's not just theory. Dr. Friese looks at the history, why coding became so important, and then actually tests out using AI on real research reports.
Perfect. So our mission today is to unpack that. Trace coding back to its roots, get why it was so vital.
And then explore how generative AI might offer a different path, maybe a faster one. Still aiming for deep understanding, though.
Definitely. Efficiency without losing depth. So let's start way back. Where did this whole idea of coding even come from?
Well, it's fascinating. Dr. Friese points out the basic idea was around even before anyone called it coding.
Really?
Yeah, back in 1928, there was this researcher, Palmer, who talked about analysts being able to rearrange interview data.
Rearrange how?
So they could group remarks on the same topic together, but crucially, without losing the original context or sequence.
Ah, okay. So grouping related stuff while keeping track of where it came from. That makes sense. Almost a century ago.
Exactly. The fundamental need to organize messy text data for analysis was already clear.
So the concept was there. When did the actual word coding pop up?
It seems like the term itself first showed up in, interestingly, marketing research around 1937.
Marketing, huh? What were they using it for?
Mostly for classifying answers to open-ended survey questions. Taking all that free-form text and trying to impose some structure, put it into categories they could work with.
Okay, so making unstructured language manageable. That was the initial goal.
Pretty much. It was about creating order.
How quickly did that catch on in, say, the social sciences? Was it immediate?
Not really. It was more gradual there. You had big names like Robert K. Merton analyzing interviews very carefully, developing these complex classification systems.
But he didn't call it coding.
Not consistently, no. Then later, in the 50s, you had Theodor Adorno and his team with the authoritarian personality. They used terms like categorization, classification.
Ah, similar ideas. Laying the conceptual groundwork.
Exactly. They were doing the work, the systematic analysis, even if the label wasn't quite fixed yet.
So when did coding become like the standard term everyone started using?
It seems the mid-1950s was when it started getting more common. Dr. Friese mentions Hyman and Sheetsley in '54 using code and coding quite a bit in their work.
But still maybe not universally agreed upon.
Probably not completely standardized yet, no. It sounds like a period where methods were still being figured out, debated.
A bit messy, methodologically speaking. So what really cemented coding as, the way to do qualitative analysis?
The article points to Becker and Geer's Boys in White study in 1960 as a real turning point.
The study on medical students, why was that so important?
Because they were really explicit about their analytical process. They spelled it out.
Why?
Well, they were qualitative researchers working in a field, medicine and psychology then, that was heavily quantitative. They basically had to prove their methods were rigorous.
Ah, right. They needed to justify their approach.
Exactly. So by detailing how they systematically pulled out material from their field notes, which was, let's face it, coding, they helped legitimize it, gave it credibility.
They showed their work, essentially, made it transparent.
Precisely. Provided a kind of blueprint.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So we got the history down. Now, technology.
Yeah.
How did tools change the game for coding? I imagine things like tape recorders had a big impact.
Oh, massive.
Yeah.
Huge. When tape recorders became common in the 60s and 70s, suddenly researchers weren't just relying on quick notes or memory.
They could get everything, word for word.
Everything. Full transcripts, which meant the sheer volume of data just exploded.
Right. Suddenly you've gone from maybe summary notes to hundreds of pages of text per interview.
Exactly. And dealing with that amount of raw text, well, coding became almost a practical necessity. How else could you find anything specific? How could you manage it all?
Yeah, I can't imagine sifting through all that manually without some kind of system. It sounds like a nightmare.
It really forced the issue of needing systematic organization.
And then came computers, I assume. That must have been the next leap.
Absolutely. Starting around the 1980s, you see the rise of Kamenhauke's computer-assisted qualitative data analysis software.
Right, programs like NVivo, Actiles.ti, MXQDA.
Exactly. Nudist was an early one that evolved into NVivo. These weren't just places to store your text. They provided a whole digital infrastructure.
How so?
Well, you could build complex code systems, digitally tag segments of your data, link things together, and most importantly, retrieve coded data much more flexibly and powerfully.
So it made the process of coding much more systematic and maybe efficient.
Definitely streamlined the mechanics of it, yeah. Took it from index cards and highlighters to something much more sophisticated.
Okay, so we've traced the how, the history, and the tools, but let's get into the why. What was coding really for? It wasn't just about tidy data, right?
No, absolutely not. It was never just about organization for organization's sake. It was always a means to an end, a tool for deeper understanding.
How would you define that core purpose?
Well, Johnny Saldana has a great definition. He says a code is basically a word or short phrase that symbolically assigns a summative, salient, essence-capturing attribute to a piece of text.
Essence capturing. I like that. Boiling it down to its core meaning.
Exactly. It's about labeling the key idea in that segment.
And what did that allow researchers to do? What were the main benefits?
Well, several key things. First, grouping related bits of data. Finding all the parts that talk about, say, challenges or coping strategies.
Right, seeing patterns across different interviews or documents.
Precisely. Second, systematic retrieval. If you wanted to really dig into challenges, you could pull up all the data coded that way.
Makes sense. What else?
Third, trying to retain the original meaning and nuance while also identifying those broader patterns. It's a balancing act.
Okay, not losing the richness of the original words.
Yeah. And finally, as we mentioned, just managing large volumes of text efficiently. It made complex data sets workable.
So seeing the details and the big picture, finding patterns without oversimplifying.
That's the goal. And Lynn Richards made a really important point here.
What was that?
She emphasized that in qualitative analysis, coding is fundamentally about data retention, keeping those important bits accessible.
As opposed to quantitative coding.
Which is often about data reduction, turning things into numbers. Qualitative coding, she argued, is more like creating bookmarks or signposts.
Entry points back into the rich, meaningful parts of your data.
Exactly. So you can revisit them, compare them, think about them more deeply.
Okay, crystal clear. Coding, rich history, evolved with tech, crucial purpose for managing and analyzing data while keeping its meaning intact. Now, the disruptor, generative AI. How does this throw a wrench in the works? Or does it? Does AI make all that history? Well, just history.
That really is the million-dollar question, isn't it? AI's ability to process and understand text directly challenges that traditional need for manual coding.
If the AI can just read the documents and answer my research questions, why would I spend weeks coding first?
Exactly. It suggests this possibility of a more direct path, skipping the manual tagging and going straight to asking questions of the data, potentially shifting the researcher's effort.
Shifting it from the mechanics to
the higher level interpretation, perhaps. Asking better questions, synthesizing the AI's findings, it's a potential fundamental shift.
Sounds very appealing. Almost too good to be true. The article raises some red flags too, right? It's not just press button, get insights.
Oh, absolutely not. Dr. Friese is quick to warn against seeing AI as some kind of magic black box analyst or a one-click solution. That's dangerous thinking.
Why dangerous? What are the risks?
Well, the familiar AI pitfalls. Hallucination, making things up. Lack of transparency, you don't always know why it gave an answer. Bias, reflecting biases in its training data.
So you could end up with unreliable, biased, or just plain wrong conclusions if you're not careful.
Precisely. We can't just blindly trust it. The researcher's critical judgment is still essential.
So it's not about replacing the researcher. What's the alternative vision then?
Dr. Friese talks about collaborative dialogic analysis.
Dialogic, like a conversation.
Exactly. Think of the AI as a very smart research assistant. It can find information, organize it, even summarize in response to your questions. But you, the researcher, are still driving.
Asking the questions, guiding the inquiry, evaluating the answers.
Yes, you remain in control. AI is the powerful assistant, not the final authority.
That feels much more grounded, and the article actually demonstrates this with that analysis of reports on AI and the labor market.
Yes, it's a great practical example. She took 5 different reports, about 180 pages total, all about how AI is changing work.
Okay.
And instead of starting by developing a coding scheme and manually coding them,
She just started asking the AI questions.
pretty much directed questions to the AI assistant about the content of those reports, a totally different workflow.
Interesting. So how did that play out? What kind of insights did the AI pull out?
Well, she started broad, asked the AI about the first document, how does Gen AI change professional skill requirements?
And what did it say?
The AI summarized that the report laid out 6 possible future scenarios, from minor tweaks to really big shifts. And in those bigger shift scenarios, it flagged things like data analytics, machine learning skills, interdisciplinary collaboration becoming much more important.
Okay, so a high-level map from the first report. Then what?
Then a more specific question for the second document. Give me a list of professions mentioned as being affected. The AI listed programmers, writers, mathematicians, tax and finance people, news analysts, web designers, legal folks, education experts. Quite a range. And it summarized that jobs involving data processing, analysis, creative work, writing those, seemed particularly impacted according to that report.
Interesting that programmers are on that list. Given the need for machine learning skills mentioned before, maybe it's a change in skills needed within programming.
That's a great point. And that kind of nuance might be easier to spot with this interactive approach, maybe, than with a rigid, predefined code.
Possibly. How did the analysis go with the other documents?
For document 3, the question was about its perspective on AI's impact, asking for categories of occupations.
And the AI provided categories.
Yeah, things like routine tasks, which might be harmed, non-routine tasks, potentially benefiting, jobs needing social skills, maybe less affected, tech and IT seeing more demand, education and business services needing a mix of tech and social skills, and management roles potentially shifting towards more strategic thinking.
So different documents, different ways of slicing the problem. What about 4 and 5?
Document 4 mentions support for social and hospitality jobs from AI, but also high automation risk for programmers again, low risk for kindergarten teachers, emphasizing that human touch. It also talked about demand rising for analysis, digitalization, robotics, while falling in surface admin roles.
Okay. And document 5?
Document 5 took a wider view across industries. It pointed to AI taking over routine stuff like vehicle control, accounting, even some programming and medical diagnostics. Also highlighted financial analysts, mathematicians, lawyers, roles heavy on information processing, and mentioned likely reductions in bookkeeping, data entry, secretarial work.
Wow. Okay. So the AI is pulling out quite specific details from each report based on the questions. Was there more follow-up on document 5?
Yes, a key question about its view on the overall labor market impact.
What was the gist?
The AI summarized that document 5 expected a new human-machine division of labor, a growing need for AI big data skills, plus analytical and creative thinking. But overall, it was actually optimistic about net job creation.
Optimistic. Interesting. But wasn't there another crucial point from document 5, something about training occupations?
Yes, that was a really important follow-up. The researchers specifically asked about that term.
And what did the AI find?
It highlighted a warning from an economist, Melanie Arntz, mentioned in the report.
Yeah.
Her point was, basically, don't just focus on academics and high-tech jobs when talking about AI.
Why not?
Because things like the green transition mean we'll desperately need skilled workers in trades, in apprenticeship fields. And AI might not fill those gaps.
Ah, the skilled trades. Electricians, plumbers, builders.
Exactly. Arntz argued we need to make apprenticeships more attractive, alongside pushing for university degrees, because there could be real shortages there, a really vital bit of nuance.
That is crucial. A reminder that the impact isn't uniform and we need a broad view. Okay, so after questioning each document, did the researcher ask the AI to compare them? Look for overlaps?
Yes, that was the next step, a cross-case analysis. What themes popped up across multiple reports?
And what did the AI find were common threads?
It identified a few key overlaps. The impact on routine tasks was mentioned often, the idea that AI's impact will be felt across many industries, and this concept of a new division of labor between people and machines.
Okay, those seem like major recurring themes. What about unique points? Things only mentioned in 1 or 2 reports.
The AI noted that the specific professions highlighted varied quite a bit between reports. The optimism about job growth was mainly in document 5, and that specific focus on training occupations was also unique to document 5.
So the AI could distinguish between common themes and unique perspectives across the different sources.
Right. And the article describes this interaction as being like talking to a search engine with memory.
What does that mean exactly? Search engine with memory?
Well, unlike a normal search where each query is separate, the AI remembers the conversation. It keeps track of what you've already asked and found.
So you can build on previous questions, ask follow-ups in context.
Exactly. And crucially, it showed where each piece of information came from, which document, which section. So transparency was maintained. You could always trace it back.
Which is different from traditional coding, where you might tag something and then later have to go back to your code book in the original text to remember the exact context.
Precisely. The article contrasts this with what a traditional coding approach might have looked like for the same project.
Yeah. What would that have involved?
Probably developing a code book with categories like types of professions affected, reasons for impact, nature of impact, future scenarios, overall outlook, skills needed, that kind of thing.
And then going through all 180 pages, tagging segments with those codes.
Right. And then after all that coding, you'd start retrieving the coded data for each category and comparing it.
So the AI approach sounds much more interactive, more iterative from the start.
That seems to be the key difference highlighted. More direct engagement with the data through questions, rather than coding first, analyzing later.
Okay, let's circle back then to the big question we started with. Does generative AI fulfill this dream of, life without coding? What's the final verdict?
Well, like most interesting questions, the answer is nuanced. It really depends on what you mean by the dream. If the dream is just push a button, get perfect analysis, no human thought needed, then no, absolutely not. That's not just a dream, Dr. Friese suggests. It's potentially a dangerous one, given the risks we talked about.
Right, the black box problem, bias, inaccuracy.
But if the dream is more about shifting the researcher's focus, moving away from the hours spent on the mechanical parts of coding, the tagging, the organizing,
And spending more time
on the higher level thinking, asking really insightful questions, spotting connections, developing theories, interpreting the findings more deeply. If that's the dream, then yeah, AI might be getting us closer.
So it's not about AI replacing the researcher's brain,
Not at all.
but maybe taking over some of the more laborious, time-consuming tasks, freeing up our time and cognitive energy for the stuff humans do best.
That seems to be the potential. AI handles some of the sorting and retrieval, allowing us to focus on synthesis, interpretation, critical evaluation. It's about enhancing our abilities.
Building on that century of qualitative methodology, not throwing it out.
Exactly. It's an evolution. New tools and new ways of collaborating human plus machine to achieve that core goal of deep understanding.
A powerful way to frame it. Evolution, not revolution, maybe. Which leaves a really interesting thought for everyone listening.
Absolutely. After hearing all this, what's your take? Does this idea of analyzing rich information through dialogue with an AI, maybe without that traditional coding step, does that resonate with you?
Or do you still feel that manual, structured coding process offers something essential, something irreplaceable?
It's definitely something to chew on as we all navigate how these powerful new tools are changing the landscape of research and understanding.
AI whispers, let's dive in.
Are you curious about analyzing qualitative data without traditional coding? Try it yourself. Register for a free trial of Q Insights and experience a new way of working with your data. Go to qinsights.ai to register now.
Qualitative flow, leading the way. Discover the tales in a digital sway.